Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you all for coming and embarking with me on this intellectual and visual experience, adventure into the Bronze Age cosmology, basically. I thought I'd do it the old-fashioned way and structure it very easily in 4 chapters. First of all, I would like to take you to the archaeological site that is in the center of this investigation. It's the Hittite rock sanctuary of Yazılıkaya, and describe it as if you are a tourist visiting it. And then we go in chronological steps of our research. The first thing we recognized is that there's a calendar function in those images in this rock sanctuary. And then after a few more years of study, we figured out that there's also the static layers of the cosmos. And then, of course, the 4th step is the implications. Where will this lead us in the future, in future research? You can tell from my accent that I am only 1 wheelchair away from Dr. Strangelove. And if somebody talks about archaeoastrology or so, the question is, how believable is this? Yeah, everybody can make up things and see things in patterns. That's why I would like to emphasize that this research, the first 3 parts of it, were published in peer-reviewed journals. This one, the first one on the calendar function, came out in 2019. And the one on the static layers of the cosmos in 2021. And you can see that there are 4 co-authors. And if you combine the experience of the co-authors, you end up like with 140 years of professional experience. And if you take the peer reviewers and the editors also in, you end up with like 400 years of experience that went into that, and really felt like that. One of the peer reviewers had 150 caveats, and we had to address every one of them to get it published. So what I want to say is there are not that many people who do archaeoastronomy. We meet about once a year, and there are about 50 that come together. But out of those, we had the most distinguished people in the world contributing to this project in one way or another. And this is why I start with the team. Usually one ends with the team. This is a snapshot from our fieldwork in 2015 when we started with this 10 years ago. And you have here Bernd Poscholt on the left is, in my opinion, the best archaeophotographer in the world. And Guido Köhler has been teaching scientific illustration for 25 years at ZHDK, Zürcher Hochschule der Künste. So we had our illustrator in the field. There's Rita Gauci. She has a Doctor of Science in Archaeology and in Astronomy, and she is now the president of the European Society of Astronomy and Culture. And then there's the driver and the policeman. And when that was not enough, we needed more expertise. When we saw the implications, we got Ed Krupp on board, and this man is really a legend. E.C. Krupp, he has been the director of the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles for 50 years, 50, yeah? Unbelievable. And he is a specialist in archaeoastronomy. He's written like 20 books about it early on. He's also been to Yazılıkaya 10 years before me or 20 years before me and saw some cosmological aspects. And it helped tremendously to get him on board. He has seen 2,400 archaeological sites in his life. He's just an incredible person. It's wonderful to have somebody in that expertise. And this is some snapshots from the Griffith Observatory, but we will look at that in more detail. So this is about the scope of the team that worked on this subject for 10 years. 2 papers are out, 3 more papers are coming out this year. And we are still at the beginning. There's so much more to discover. And with that, I come to item 1, chapter 1, the site. So, what does Hittite stand for? That's a culture in late Bronze Age central Anatolia, contemporary with the Mycenaeans in Greece. Yazılıkaya is the modern Turkish word for inscribed stone. So it occurs in several places, but this is the most famous site with that name. And in its current appearance, it was built around 1230 BC. So if you want to look at the geography, this is what the political geography looked like at around 1200 BC. In green here, well, you can see the green area. This is the Hittite kingdom. This were their neighbors, which we call the Luwian kingdoms, and these are the Mycenaean Greeks. Yeah? And our site, Hattusha, capital, you see the arrow here. This is the capital of the Hittite kingdom, in a very strange place, not very central. And the rock sanctuary is right next to it, or a few hundred meters away. Just to give you an impression of Hattusha, that's the capital of the Hittite kingdom. It has a fortification wall that was 7 kilometers long. So it is 200 hectares big, 100 times the size of Troy. Existed until about 1192 BC, for 500 years, and then it was abandoned. Somebody else took over, burned down some of the palaces and temples, and it was basically forgotten. The Hittite culture was forgotten for 3,000 years. And all the buildings you see there are temples. The Hittites described their city as the city of the gods. This was a city for the gods. Of course, the king lived there, he had his palace there, and of course he had some staff and the priests and so, and temples, but the ordinary people did not live in these 7 kilometer circumference. And just outside of this fortification wall is this natural limestone outcrop. And that is what Yazılıkaya is. And it's nothing unusual. You see more of them in the background, and they're everywhere. But the thing about this one is that it was probably used for a long period, early Bronze Age, maybe even Neolithic, but we cannot really tell because of the reworking afterwards. But it seems to be a cultural place, seems to have been a cultural place for a long time. And there's some, as you can see, between the rocks, there are some natural chords. And on the faces of these vertical walls, the Hittites engraved into the limestone bedrock figures of deities. We know that they are gods, basically. You can see the shadows here. There are over 90 of these figures. The whole thing is now UNESCO World Heritage Site, together with Hattusha, because it is so impressive. And it is really a place that has some magic to it. When you go there, you can spend 3 hours easily, and you don't feel how time is passing by. It is so fascinating. And it's not easy to say what it really is that makes it so fascinating. It was first seen by a European scholar in 1834, Charles Texier, and then 5 years later he published an account of his travels with these illustrations, which are exaggerations, basically. It made a big splash in Europe because people in Europe did not expect this kind of art in the middle of Anatolia. They knew, of course, Mesopotamian art, even 200 years ago. They knew Egyptian art, but they did not expect this kind of artistry on that level in the middle of Anatolia. And it's different from Mesopotamia, and it's different from Egypt. And part of the reason is because the illustrator exaggerated. This is what it really looks like. So when you go there, this is what you see. You see a band of people all moving in one direction. And they are labeled, which makes it very fortunate, in Luwian hieroglyphs. It was a script that existed for about 1,000 years during the second millennium. You can see the labels here. Not all of them are labeled, But because of that, we know that this is the sun god of the heavens, and right next to him is the moon god. And it has been exposed to rain and sun for over 3,000 years since it was built around 1230 BC. And that's why it is so eroded. It was probably covered with colors originally. There was never a roof over it. And here, a bit further left, you have these two chimeras, two bullmen, yeah? And they are standing on a sign, this podest, it's a sign, it's a Luwian hieroglyphic sign for Earth. And they are holding something that looks like a banana or a half moon, and that is the Luwian hieroglyphic sign for sky. So there are celestial connotations in this rock sanctuary, even though it is on rock. For instance, here, if we look at the sun god of the heavens and the moon god, and again, the next to them is Shaushka and Ea. These are two Mesopotamian celestial deities. And Shaushka is supported by Ninata and Kolita, and those are her servants. So all 6 of them are in the sky. And it's emphasized because they have wings. You can see? Wings. Yeah. Yeah. So we have these celestial connotations. There have not much attention has been paid to them. This is the main group. There are lots of people coming from the left and lots of people coming from the right. And they meet in the center. They meet right here. And this is due north. And this is, of course, the highest. Those are the highest gods. They are the biggest. They are in the most prominent place. So there is an emphasis on hierarchy, undeniable, even though they are all in the same level. They increase in size, and they increase in significance. And then on the right, this is the main group. These are the five highest deities. Teshub, the storm god, and Hebat, his wife. They're standing on, he's standing on 2 mountain gods, and she's standing on the Panther. And then 2 of their children and 1 grandchild. This is the 5 highest of this pantheon. And then on the right are female deities, which are very similar, the same type. And here I'm looking now from north to south, so from the main group towards the entrance. And you can see a few interesting things here. For instance, this platform here, this is the floor. That used to be the floor. This should not be the floor. This should be filled in. We should be half a meter higher up. Here you see the natural surface, and it would have continued there. So everything in this corner here has been hewn by stonesmiths. Yeah? So there could have been other surfaces that were removed when this last one was produced. We don't know anything about that. But the reason why I'm showing this one here is this column on the left. You can see here that the stonesmith let one piece of bedrock protrude, which in my opinion, when I came there, implies a technical function. And that's why I got interested as a natural scientist to look into that, at whether we can figure out a technical function behind all that. And so we put a team together and looked into that. And in the end, I think some of what we did is due to serendipity. But let's first see where we were when we started, when I came first to the site in 2014. This monography was just published by the German Archaeological Institute, and the excavator said many researchers have worked intensively towards an interpretation of the site, but to this date it retains much of its mystery. It is still by no means clear today what function the rock sanctuary actually fulfilled. So this is the level where we were in 2011. Needless to say, when I finished this talk, every one of you can explain every one of the 90 deities and their function. And so the first thing we found was that there is actually a calendar function hidden in these figures. But it was not something that came easily. I spent really months reading on Mesopotamian cosmology and didn't know how to approach the subject to get more inspiration. The German Archaeological Institute has produced nice line drawings, and we then copied them to turn them into vector graphics so that we can play with them electronically on the computer. And what I did at some point is I put everything that is in chamber A, there's also in chamber B, get to that. Everything that's in chamber B, A, I put on one chart like that. And then I stared at it for several weeks and wondered, what can I do with this? And eventually I came to the point that I said, well, there are obviously some groups, like this one on the top. The first 12, they're all identical. There's no doubt they form one group. Yeah? So if there's one group, what other groups are there? There's the main group. I showed you the 5 top highest deities. They form one group. So that makes it easy. Everything that is to the right is another group. They are also very homogeneous, as you can tell, all female deities. The ones from the left are almost all, except for the 2 servants, male deities. And then everything in between. So that's pretty easy. What's the next step? And that didn't take so long. Count them. Yeah, how many are there? There are 12 in the first group, 30 in the next group, 5 in the main group, and 19 in the bottom group, and these are separated by this column. 8 of them are separated by this column. And so we have these numbers. And if you feed an archaeoastronomer with these numbers, they immediately know what it is. It's like the Fibonacci numbers for a mathematician or so. And the reason that was not recognized before is because only 17 of the female deities are preserved. One was nicked. They stole it and used it as a building stone. And then it was found in a neighboring village. And the other one, the village is called Yekbas. This is why this figure is called Yekbas. And the other one only has his name left, but the figure is gone. So there are 17 preserved, but it should have been 19. And if you multiply 12 by 30 and add 5, you have 365, the number of days. But this is not really maybe a symbolic indication. But with these numbers, you can operate a lunisolar calendar in perpetuity. You can operate it today with high accuracy. And I will, of course, show you how this worked. It all begins with the beginning of the month, the lunar months. So they had lunar months, which we don't have anymore today. Our month has nothing to do with the moon, unfortunately, because it would have been much more natural. They counted the months with the first visibility of the moon, like that. Yeah? That is the beginning of the month. And then from day after day, the moon travels a step further on the sky. This photo was not very easy to take. We had to put the camera in one place for 5 days. Cannot be moved a millimeter. We went there every night at midnight to the minute and took a picture to indicate how the moon in 24 hours has traveled across the sky from right to left. Very important. And so we have the same image here. With the stick of the deity on the right indicates the beginning of the lunar months with the first visibility of the lunar crescent. And then the moon increases until you reach the full moon with those 2 bullmen. And what they are holding is not an indication for the half moon. It is what we call the celestial boat. It's a vehicle that transports celestial bodies across the sky. It can be the moon, it can be the sun, it can be a star. And that vehicle is really very important. We'll get back to it. It occurs in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, everywhere. It's the celestial boat, the boat of light or the boat of heaven. And so this symbolizes that on that particular day, every month is the day of the full moon. Again, you think this, I'm a lunatic, I can make these things up, nothing of that is visible there. Yeah, but if you go to Egypt, 2,000 kilometers south, 1,000 kilometers later, you find the very same thing, only from left to right, which is now astronomically wrong, because we saw the moon is going from right to left. And here there's absolutely no doubt that this indicates the day of the lunar months. So, how does it work? Because the moon is traveling on ellipses around the Earth. One lunar month is 30 days and one is 29. So they are interchanging, 29 and 30 days. So after 12 of these lunar months, you have 354 days. Has nothing to do with the solar year. Yeah? So there's this discrepancy. There are 11 and a quarter days missing. If you want to correlate lunar months with solar years, then this is what's happening at the bottom. Every third year, you introduce a lunar month, an intercalary month, artificially. And if you do that over 19 years, you do it seven times, then you have basically correlated the lunar months and the solar years. This is the famous Metonic cycle after the Greek astronomer Meton. So the baby became a Hittite warrior in 19 years, and the two cycles are correlated again. And this is how it worked in this sanctuary. On the left you have the lunar months. You have the days per lunar month, including the 30th day. Then you have the first visibility of the crescent, the full moon, and the new moon after 29 or 30 days. And on the right you have the years. You are counting the years, 19 years, it's called enneadecaitos. And the separation after 8 years is because you can do the same thing after 8 years, it's just not as accurate. It's called octaedros. So if you have 8 years, it amounts to 96 lunar months plus 3 intercalary months. And that is 2,924 days. You always have a full day, there are no half days, obviously. And so the accuracy is like 3.5 hours per year between the two cycles. But if you do that for 19 years, you have 228 plus 7 intercalary months, and that is 6,940 days. And now the accuracy is 6.5 minutes per year, 2 hours in total. So after 19 years, the deviation is 2 hours in total. And then you have synchronized the solar years and the lunar months. And you get a very accurate calendar that way, one that, as I said, could work today. And so we reconstructed, we had an artist draw what this sanctuary actually looked like at the time, probably colored, we don't know how, but something like that. This was only accessible, of course, to the king and his family and the highest echelons of the society. This was secret knowledge. Yeah. This was the direct connection to the sky, to the gods in the sky. That gave them power. And then now night is falling. And the night sky you see is again not just made up, it is the night sky on the day of the summer solstice, 1250 BC at midnight. And what is interesting is if you look at the polar star, this is the polar star. Here's, I said this is due north, but it's not. The polar star is there. It's the difference. Who knows what causes the difference? The physicists. It's the Earth's axis is wobbling, and after 3,000 years, it's not pointing in the same direction. So now it is pointing at the polar star, but in Hittite times it wasn't. It's a precision. Yeah. So there is a slight difference because the Earth's axis is wobbling. I think it's 22,000 years it takes to make a full circle. So day and night, if we know that, yeah, this is, and we know that. It's when it's something that we all deal with. When a new child is born, the first thing that we train the child is to sleep during the night. Our bodies, there are cells in the body that follow the rhythms. It's something we cannot deny. And of course, people have been wondering what causes day and night. And for 10,000 years, maybe 20,000 years. And they needed an explanation what caused that. The real explanation, what causes day and night, was discovered so recently that you can actually go into the office of the person who did it. Nicolaus Copernicus in the 17th century. Yeah? You can go in his lab, you can see his bedroom, see how he worked or so. Until the 17th century, people did not know what causes day and night. And they needed an explanation. They needed an explanation how the cosmos worked. They are experiencing all these cyclicities, and they don't know what the driving force is behind it. And we see that in all the cultures around the globe. Here we have the seasons, for instance. What causes the seasons? It's the cyclical nature of time, because after the vegetation dies in the winter, it comes up in the spring. So there is a cyclical function of time. There's also a linear function of time. An organism is born and then lives and then dies. And of course, they transferred the image of the cyclical time onto the people and thought maybe the person is reborn and then everything starts all over again. And the same as third cycle is, of course, the lunar phases. And here we even have a connection to human fertility. Because of the correlation in time, basically. And so they thought, as we have a cycle in nature that makes sure that it's reborn, and we have a cycle that makes sure that people, children are born or so, we have this cyclical nature everywhere. And the driving force behind it are the stars. The paradigm was as above, so below. And the reason for that is if you see the stars rising, there's a difference of 4 minutes from day to day. 4 minutes earlier every day. And the reason for that, they basically they interpreted this as the driving force for what's happening on Earth. So if you see Sirius, for instance, rising after it has disappeared for some time, and the floods of the Nile being associated with the first rising of Sirius, then they think this is the driving mechanism behind that. So as above, so below. There is something happening in the sky, and what is happening on Earth is a mirror image of what is happening in the sky. And if we can read the signals of what is happening in the sky, and they are bad omens, then there is something we might be able to do to prevent whatever bad destiny is happening. So a team in a sanctuary like Yazılıkaya had an exorcist, for instance, for little interventions, yes, if something small happened. If the priests recognized that there is a lunar eclipse coming, then that was a major intervention, because it might be threatening the life of the king. The king was replaced by somebody else because he might be killed. And then they killed the other person, and so the omen is fulfilled, and then replaced the king. So these are the cycles. But there are also the directions, let's say. One of the directions is indicated here, due north. Yeah? In this time-lapse movie, we see how everything spins around the polar star. And the people were, of course, aware of that. And so the northern alignment is extremely important. And you can see here, Hattusha is pointing towards this northern alignment, and so is Yazılıkaya. And the cardinal directions are easy to determine. You put a stick in the ground, make a circle with a rope around it, and then you wait for the sun to rise. And in the morning, the stick will cast a shadow, and it will cross that circle and in the evening, afternoon, it will cast another shadow and another junction. And if you connect the two, you have a line that is east-west. And this works throughout history, Earth's history, anywhere on the globe. So you can determine the cardinal directions very easily, and I think that has been done for 10,000 years or so. But there are two or four more directions in addition to these four that are really important for ancient civilizations. And in order to visualize them, we went to our friend Ed Krupp, who's in charge of this beautiful place after 50 years still. And this has all been renovated, and he was also, of course, supervising the renovation. And during the renovation, he extended the terrace on the right, which makes it easy for us to demonstrate the other directions. On particular days, the solstices and the equinoxes. And of course, lots of people gather, and we wanted to take photos there, so they all had to gather on the upper terrace and not on the lower terrace. These two, is the photographer and his assistant, and the camera, the star is actually hidden there. It's all driven here by tablets. And then we watch the sunset, and Ed Krupp had these lines in the floor that point towards the winter solstice sunset. And these directions are extremely important for ancient civilizations. When the first flat walls were built, not round buildings, but straight walls, they were already aligned with the solstices. And the reason for that is not to make any measurements or so. The reason is to pay tribute to the cosmos and the functionalities of the cosmos, and to show that we have understood how the driving mechanisms of the cosmos work. So we put these together, all four of them. This is the sunsets in Los Angeles over the Pacific, basically, during the winter solstice, the summer solstice, and the equinoxes. And the equinox is, per definition, due west for the sunset. So that's the cardinal direction. But the other two directions are additional directions to the cardinal directions. And as I said, this was extremely important for ancient cultures. Here's the Karnak temple in ancient Egypt, whose foundations were built in 2000 BC. And you can see that they were aligned to accommodate the rising sun of the winter solstice, like that, beautifully. There are now gathered 1,000, 2,000 people during the winter solstice, and we needed a photographer to take a picture without photos. And what is the trick to have that done? You send the photographer a day early and there's nobody. You don't see the difference. I sent this picture to Juan Antonio Belmonte, who's another superstar in archaeoastronomy. He actually took this picture, and this is a remake of his, and to cheer him up when he was a bit depressed or so. And it didn't cheer him up because, again, of our wobbling of the axis. When it was built, the sun would not be up above this frame, it would be in the window. Yeah, it was designed to be in the window. So if you take all these directions together, then you can basically translate time into space, which is what our analog watches do. They translate time into space for the day, but here it's for the year. So from the winter solstice, this would be the sunrise of the winter solstice, but because there are hills, the sun rises a bit later. That's the upper point. Yeah? So from then to the equinox, you have the winter, the season. And from the equinox to the summer solstice, you have the spring. And then the other way back. Yeah? So that's for the sun rises in Hattusha, on the highest elevation. And if you look in Hattusha in the other direction, then we see the sunsets basically for the same, doing the same. And that could be easily observed from Yazılıkaya. From Hattusha, the highest elevation, you see all, but from Yazılıkaya, which is further down, you see only the sun sets really well, because there's a mountain on the other side. So, and did people pay attention to this? Of course, and they made it obvious. Another picture that Juan Antonio Belmonte took originally, and then we copied it. This is the first building, artificial building, that was built in front of Yazılıkaya, the rock sanctuary. And you can see that the wall is aligned towards the sunset at the summer solstice. And again, it is one diameter of the sun off because of the wobbling of the Earth axis. And here's the gate of the city. And so we find these alignments, and Belmonte and Cesar Gonzalez Garcia, they measured these, already published in 2011. They went to Hattusha and took 61 measurements of monuments and their direction in space, and these peaks indicate how many buildings are aligned towards the equinox or the summer solstice or the winter solstice. So there is a strict alignment, not of every building, but of a statistically significant number. And if you compare that to Egypt, where this research has been done for the past 150 years, you see here a similar picture, but not even as pronounced as for Hattusha. So the Hittites were as concerned about the sky as the Egyptians were, and it has not been really recognized yet. If we look at the plan of the first buildings that were built around 1500 at Yazılıkaya, it looks like this. This is the wall we saw that is aligned with the sunset at summer solstice. And if this applies to an external wall, it of course also applies to the central axis. Here at the end, we had two monoliths, two big stones, this big, which were only like 20 centimeters apart. So too narrow for a person to pass through. It doesn't make sense. They call it a gatehouse, not a gatehouse. Makes no sense as a gatehouse. They've removed those stones, unfortunately. But if you reconstruct the initial function, you can imagine that there was a light beam, of course, that was falling through there. And then behind the building, it would hit on the wall, and this was what the wall was found. And the priest could, with charcoal, they could keep track how far the shadow of the sun goes until it goes back. And if you do that, you can determine the solar year down to 1 day. You can determine the duration of 1 year. I did a model experiment with that in my kitchen. It looks like this. Around the day of the summer solstice, then the shadow goes all the way to the outlets and back. Of course, it only works when you have outlets. Without electricity, it wouldn't work. So Juan Antonio Belmonte found this alignment, but we found another one. You can see how crooked this architectural plan is. Makes no sense. Why did they do it like that? Because of their concern about celestial parameters. The last building that was built here in red was aligned with the sunset at the winter solstice. And that's how we come up with this crooked plan. There's another thing here. There's this pedestal in the middle. This one here. There was probably a statue. It's not in the center of the court, and it's difficult to explain what the function of that was. And we produced this reconstruction of how the light actually traveled on the day of the summer solstice, computer programs with which you can do that. And you can see that there was a way that a figure, a statue on this pedestal would have been illuminated by natural light only on this particular day, only during a religious festival. Of course, then there would be people who gathered, and they would have, and it's called an epiphany. That is an epiphany, when you experience this power of the deities being transmitted to their statue, their representatives on earth. And then they go through the gate next to it and go in chamber A of Yazılıkaya, and then you see the picture of the king, who is the representative of the gods on earth. And it's always in the shadow, like this. Only on that particular day, during that festival, it is also illuminated. So the power of the celestial gods is passed on to the king as well. And so we did this time lapse, and then it turned out everything gets dark for 2 minutes, and then there's a break, a 2-minute break, and then you get one individual light beam illuminating the cartouche. Ta-da! Like a hidden track. Yeah? And this is all done with natural light. Unbelievable sophistication. Of course, then you can also start building things artificially, like here's chamber 1 in Hattusha, built with stones in the middle of nowhere, basically, but it catches the sunlight during the winter solstice perfectly. And so you can imagine how there was a religious service, and people carried a figure, a statue of a deity, and put it up there, and it was illuminated by the natural sunlight. Ta-da! And then they carried it back. So this is our first publication that we did, and 6 years ago I gave a talk on this, and this is basically as far as we had gotten at that stage. And then, with the help of Ed Krupp and his previous work, we were able to carry it further. Now, we are talking about the static function of the deities. So, of course, the cosmos is arranged in horizons. We are standing on Earth, and underneath, well, there is something. If you dig a hole, then you get into groundwater, so there is something underneath, but also there is an underworld. And then there's the sky, and here the Babylonian cosmology, they distinguish 2 levels of sky. Sometimes they have 3 levels. The Aztec had 13 levels of the sky and 9 of the underworld or so. So in different religions you have similar concepts with different numbers. Yeah? And we basically transferred this image to our deities, which are on one level, which is irritating. They should have been on different levels, and then everything would have been recognized much earlier. So the highest deities are pointing towards the polar star. Yes, they are basically transmitting messages from these stars around the celestial circumpolar zone. Yes, they are not the stars themselves; they are just transmitting messages through them. The sun, the king is somewhere in between because he is the servant of the deities. Then you have the lunar months. So 2 levels of the sky, dark blue and light blue, and all these white boxes are the circularities. And then if you look at the lunar days, you have one group which is associated with the sky. Many of them have wings, yes. And one group which is associated with the earth. These are mountain gods. These are fountains coming off of their robes, yes. So even though they are all in one line, some of them represent the earth and some of them represent the sky. And it is literally written there, earth and sky, yes. So and these represents the cyclicities, the waning and the waxing of the moon, basically represents rebirth and rejuvenation. And the same with the years, here forming this group, the female deities. Half of them is the summer, and half of them is the winter, and that represents life and death and rebirth during the time of the solstices. And then you get another chamber, and that is then chamber B, where the netherworld is. And that is something that Hittitologists have recognized early on, that chamber B represents the netherworld. So this could be associated with death, but it could also be a temporary death. It could be something, a death that you overcome. You can see here the great king Tutalia. This is the small figure, embraced by his deity Shahuma, who is leading him through the underworld to make sure that he comes out safely at the other end. This is what chamber B looks like. You see it looks pretty threatening. And there's another group of 12 identical deities in that group. And then there's Nergal, the underworld god, on the other side, very frightening. And then at the entrance, this is an artificial entrance, the chamber itself is natural. You have these lion-headed demons, which is a Mesopotamian iconography and very characteristic for transitional phases, and basically representing the solstices and the change from chamber A to chamber B. So in Yazılıkaya you could go from the earth to the underworld, and from the earth to the sky and to the uppermost sky. So they had basically the different levels of the cosmos accessible. With that I come to my conclusions. Yazılıkaya depicts the Hittite cosmos, the Hittite view of the cosmos. It shows the earth, the sky and the underworld, as well as celestial cyclicities, and how the entire cosmos is inhabited by deities. They are in the sky, they are on earth, they take care of lakes and of rivers, they are in the underworld, everywhere are deities, and there's a ranking between them, and they speak about it in their text. The higher gods take this bit for themselves. And we now understand the rock sanctuary and its function, and similar depictions of cosmology occur elsewhere. And this leads me to, if you can bear with me for another few minutes, the last and final chapter of my talk. What are the implications? Where does it take us? For me, this is actually always the most important bit of any research is, will it lead to further research? Yeah? And I think in this particular case, it is exceedingly helpful to inspire more research. So for instance, in the 7th century BC, there was a warrior grave found with these little figurines, 29 of them, buried in a burial. And now we can say not only that the figures matched those of Yazılıkaya, that was obvious, but this warrior was probably buried with a pocket calendar. That's it. It was his favorite pocket calendar, like a pocket watch. And if we look at the central panel with these deities, which I interpret as indicating the northern sky around the polar star, again, you might think this is far-fetched. I mean, we can come up with any interpretation. But would you have guessed that that is the northern sky? Yeah? This is the famous astronomical ceiling in the grave of Seti I, and there's absolutely no doubt that this is the northern sky. So we find similarities in the iconography between Egypt and Hattusha, and there were close contacts between the families. Ramesses II had married 2 Hittite princesses at that time, and the family was visiting each other. So they saw these things, and they took over some of the ideas, and many Egyptian connotations. So what we need to do is basically put Yazılıkaya not on one level, but on several levels, and distinguish between the earth and the netherworld, the sky, and, well, another level of the sky, let's call it heaven. Yeah? And that makes it so much easier. If they would not have been on one level, if they would have been like that, it would have been very easy. Easy to say, because we have examples for that. This is Eflatun Pinar in 1887, very famous picture by John Henry Haynes, which we, of course, colored artificially. And this is what it looks like today. This is a spring sanctuary, a Hittite spring sanctuary, from pretty much the same period. And if we apply our scheme to this, it looks like that. So you have in green the earth with 2 king and queen, maybe represented, now eroded. But what's really important is definitely 2 levels of the sky. You have these winged sun disk here, and then you have another winged sun disk, a different level up above. 2 levels of the sky. Sky and heaven. Yeah? And you know underworld, because there's a lake, and the underworld is represented by the lake, basically, what's underwater. And this has been found out by the archaeologist Kurt Bittel, 1941. He wrote The whole, however, can only be a representation of the worldview, because the large figures inside, just like the lower atlases, grow out of the water, that is, out of the element of the deep, the underworld. They support the winged sun disk above and thus the sky. And Kurt was in charge of the excavations at Hattusha in Yazılıkaya, and he published this in a book about Yazılıkaya. But he did not see that he was basically describing Yazılıkaya with the same words he was using there. And we see that everywhere. So what used to be individual items can now be connected. Here's a little piece on 10 by 10 centimeters, ivory plaque, again with deities on different levels, again from the 13th century BC. If we apply our scheme to it, you see the different horizons. And there's another famous piece. It's so heavy that the Hittites could not move it out of the quarry. It's still sitting there. If you look at it from above, it looks like this. And it could be an even more schematic view of the cosmos. And we find very similar interpretations, for instance, in Egyptian iconography. This is the famous alabaster sarcophagus of Seti I. And on the front side, on the inside, across the whole height, there's this image here. And you can see here how the boat of light is pulled up by the underworld, by a deity, and then it carries the sun across the sky, and then the sun is received again and goes back into the underworld. And the deities, all the figures are deities, they are supporting this mechanism. And we have to make sure that the deities can do their job right, because the structure helps us make sure that we can live. Yes, in Aztec Mexico, they killed tens of thousands of people because they had the feeling the gods needed the blood in order to do their job, or as a gift to thank them for providing this service, making sure that this mechanism works. Another item from the Jordan Valley is the Ein Samia Gobli, is 8 centimeters tall with a picture on it. We produced an image of what it would have looked like when it was still functioning. And then, of course, a graphic illustration of these two images. It's one image, but it consists of two scenes, left and right. And if you look at the right scene first, you see two people, deities. They are holding our celestial boat here. And it transports the sun in this case. And there's the snake, and it's not very happy. And on that side, there's complete chaos. And the snake is there, and it's very, very assertive. And there's men and animals are grown together, and the animals are also not split up, and also connected humans with the plants, and so nothing works. This cannot work. This is what the Bible describes as tohu vabohu. That was the chaos. That was the chaos that existed before the cosmos formed. And so the cosmos was formed by splitting animals and humans, splitting along this axis, splitting along that axis, splitting everything. And that was done because the sun was born. And now the sun is there, and it provides the stability through those cycles, because the deities make sure that the sun rises every day. We have to make sure that the deities are happy and that we fulfill their services. And this cup was then put in a grave at 2200 BC, so very, very early on. It is the oldest cosmological depiction in the world, in my opinion. And we think that the iconography goes back to Sumer, basically, Akkad. So this is where the images were conceived, but it was produced somewhere in Syria. We can tell that from the craftsmanship, and then was deposited because it was transported through trade to Ein Samia, to the Jordan Valley. This manuscript is in print, yes, in print. And when I sent it to Juan Antonio Belmonte, he said about this particular illustration, this is very hypothetical, yes. Of course, we can say the iconography is similar. We make the parallels with what we see in Mesopotamia, but it would have been nice to have some additional evidence to support this reconstruction. And make a long story short, we found that evidence up here in southeastern Turkey. In Lida Höyük, there is an item that is, after the Ein Samia Cup, the second oldest depiction of the cosmos in the world. And so the sky disk of Nebra has just lost 2 spaces in the ranking. It's about 10 centimeters tall, and you can see many of the elements we have talked about. You can see here the celestial boat, you can see the sun as a celestial body, you can see the cardinal directions, you can see 2 people, perhaps deities, supporting this mechanism, and so on. So we are in a different stage now. We realize that the Hittites were much more concerned about what's going on in the skies than we have thought for the past over 100 years. In the early 1910, 1920, there were people who realized that, but then they died and it was forgotten and nobody paid attention until Juan Antonio Belmonte and Cesar González Garcia started doing their research with modern methods. And now we can, through this research, we can connect many individual items that were by themselves inexplicable and see that they basically represent pretty much the same patterns. Of course, they vary, the concepts vary from place to place and from time to time, but there are also interesting commonalities. And this is what research are there for, to figure out what the differences and what the commonalities are. So is everything figured out at this point? Absolutely not, of course, because this is 1800 BC. Let's go back another 8,000 years. 9600 BC, Göbekli Tepe, the same symbolism occurs already. What happened in those 8,000 years? Thank you very much.